Welcome into The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. I'm Ken Ray.
I'm Nicholas Raba.
And I'm Nicholas Tachek.
Online tracking this week. Since we all went online, we've heard that Big Brother is watching. Actually, we've heard that since 1984, the George Orwell book, which was written in 1948, oddly enough. Online, it's kind of true, but it's less Big Brother is watching and more Big Brother is a series of systems habitually keeping track of you and everyone else and everything else, not so much interested in you as interested in data and patterns and so on. But your actions are in that data, and what you do can be tracked. Which brings us to today's topic, online tracking, as I said a moment ago, specifically web trackers. Now, while they all do the same basic thing, track activity online, there are several different types of web trackers out there. And today we are hitting a checklist of 5, looking at tracking cookies, browser fingerprinting, tracking scripts, widgets, and web bugs, IP address and referral links, and finally, clickstream tracking. Now, we may also hit some whys, some what-to-dos, things like that along the way, but let's start with the whats, starting, as I said a moment ago, with tracking cookies.
There's no doubt you've already heard about cookies in some capacity before. Whether it's from the Clear All Cookies button in your web browser of choice, or a story in the news about cookies causing problems for people. For something so innocuously named, you might never think that this was something used to track your web activity. So what is a cookie? Well, it's a small container of data that a website creates and places on your computer, which it can access when it needs. Well, not all cookies are the same. Some of them perform basic crucial tasks like storing your password so you could quickly log in again, or telling the website that you've already logged in once. We're not focusing on those type of cookies today. Instead, we're going to talk about tracking cookies. And by that, we mean a piece of code that contains some identifying information to allow identification across websites. So let's consider an example. You visited a news site, and while you're reading an article, there's an ad on the page. That's normal, right? So you don't think about them. One of these ads might place a tracking cookie in a folder through your browser. It might contain data like your IP address and information about your browser. And it says, this user viewed our ad on this date. Now, online ad networks are vast. Just think about how many hundreds of millions of ads Google serves up every day around the web. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. You're going to run into that same advertiser again in no time. And when you do, the ad this time doesn't place a cookie. It reads the one already there. And then it adds your new location to the new information, such as what kind of content you're viewing. In turn, this information can end up back in the advertiser's hands. The goal is to tailor ads specific to your web experience. The cost, however, is that many advertisers know almost everywhere that you're going online. And it's a good reason to hit clear all cookies or browse in private mode, right? Well, not so fast. Have you ever heard of super cookies? It's like a tracking cookie on steroids. It's a tracking cookie that resists your deletion efforts by creating redundant copies of the cookie data in numerous places around your computer. The common thread is that they're all cache folders used by other browser applications. While not exactly kosher, less ethical advertisers can and do use super cookies to keep serving you more ads.
And there's not like a governing body to stop that, is there?
No, there's not. There's some people are trying to enforce the do not track flag in a browser where you're telling a site you don't want to be tracked, but that's all voluntary on the site's behalf. It's not enforced by anybody.
Right. Yeah, because advertisers totally respect the, hey, leave me alone thing. Just,
exactly.
Ask any billboard as you're driving down the street, or any radio ad if you happen to still own a radio and listen to it. But well, that's kind of a bummer. So why don't we move on? On the checklist, tracking thing number 2 today, browser fingerprinting.
So what if you choose to forego using cookies entirely, and you're vigilant about using software that can help you find and delete those super cookies? You might feel like you're much less likely to be tracked overall, but in the end, it kind of turns into a headache because you're getting rid of those good cookies along with the bad, and all sorts of things. Beyond that, it might have been true some years ago that just keeping those cookies off your system, keeping those super cookies off your system would be enough. But there's been a rise of a new way of identifying who you are on the web by advertisers. And it makes it actually more probable to uniquely identify a given user than just using something like a cookie. This is a process called browser fingerprinting. When you connect online, your computer, your modem actually gets a unique IP address that is used so your system can communicate with all those websites you're going to. That's kind of like a digital fingerprint for your computer or your modem on the web. But the way that you configure your web browser also creates other opportunities to kind of fingerprint your unique system. When you're browsing, your web browser itself will freely communicate some information about your system to the websites it visits. This is done for a variety of reasons. It can tailor a mobile version of a site to appear for mobile devices versus a desktop version for laptops or desktops. It can be stuff like screen resolution to know, this website can't take up the entire screen because it only is this ancient display. If you still have an old CRT monitor or something. So that kind of statistical data might seem pretty mundane. Browser versions included, operating system, what plugins you're using. Then there's also information about your computer's hardware. There was a recent version of Firefox, actually, that took away one of these methods of browser fingerprinting. Firefox used to provide a battery API that websites could use to track how much battery life was left on a mobile device or a laptop. So if a website was doing something really processor intensive, it could kind of scale it back so it's not totally draining visitors' batteries. Unfortunately, advertisers realized that there were tons of unique values that a battery actual voltage could actually be at, and they figured out a way to track a user with that method. So Firefox realized that, removed that API so it can't be used. I believe it was a version that came out in November, fixed that loophole.
I'm sorry, what's the value to an advertiser of knowing how much battery I have left on my phone?
Basically, the battery life API, the indication, isn't on its own going to be enough to track you. But when you're combining it with things like the screen resolution, the operating system, the web browser, all those things together can give enough unique data points to uniquely separate one visitor from another. So it's just an extra way that they can be sure it's a unique visitor. And it's kind of the same effect as setting a cookie without setting a cookie. They know that this specific device that visited at this time with this voltage for their battery and everything else is separate from this other device that had similar settings but more battery life, for example.
Forgive me for pressing this then. Is that tracking you specifically, or is that tracking just individual visitors to a site? I mean, not who the individual visitors are, but how many?
It is to an extent, but when you're combining it with all of the different data points they're gathering from across all of the different ways to identify a user, it's kind of like an extra step or an extra method they use to determine one user from another. It's not saying that, this is Ken's iPhone connecting to this website. It's not saying that. But when you have 100 different users visiting this site and there was a tracking cookie from this other site that was just visited before that, even if they're blocking cookies on this other site, maybe they can put together enough of this data. And I mean, there's whole teams of people here whose job is to figure out the best ways to do data analysis on all of this information that's being freely sent every time you surf the web. So it's a lot of smart people working on what is a very complex problem, and they're figuring out ways to track users. Essentially, is what it comes down to. So it's browser fingerprinting on its own isn't necessarily enough, but it's far enough along that combined with other things can be a different method of that advertisers can use to kind of uniquely track different users.
Let's go on to item 3 on the checklist, or items 3 actually on the checklist, tracking scripts, widgets, and web bugs.
This next category seems a little broad at first. It all breaks down to kind of the same thing. Using code that the advertisers are embedding on a web page, or not necessarily an advertiser, somebody else who wants to track you, whichever. Embedding code on the web page you're viewing will notify someone of your visit. One of the most basic ways to do this is something called a web bug. Essentially, this little critter is invisible. It's a 1x1 blank pixel image that's put somewhere on the web page, and your browser will basically try and load. It will load that resource, and if that image is stored on the tracker's website, they're going to get a hit on that image file. So they know that your system, when combined with all the other data, visited the website. It's really rudimentary. It's been used, it's still used on websites, mostly used in email, though. So newsletters will know if you open the newsletter. That lets the sender of the newsletter know how their reach was on their message. But basically, the same concepts evolved into something a little different, kind of the same way tracking cookies work. If you visit almost any web page these days, especially news or I guess Pinterest or anything like that, there's the Facebook like button everywhere, or the Twitter button, or Google Plus, or Pinterest, or Tumblr, anything. You'll see those little buttons to share the website link with your friends on your social network. Basically, anytime you're loading a page that has that like button, if you're logged into Facebook, it's phoning home to let the company know, how to target its ads to better fit your browser preferences. It's subtle, I would say, just because you wouldn't normally think of it that way. I believe Facebook got in a bit of trouble a while back because they were still keeping track of users even if they weren't logged in when they'd visit a site with that like button. Another indirect method of tracking, probably the most widely used one, is a small bit of JavaScript code called analytics.js. Almost every website will incorporate it into their web design because it is giving them a bunch of information from Google on site analytics. So you kind of, as a company, you would know how better to tailor your website to meet your users' needs, where the user went on your website, how long they were on whatever page. It's not the same as advertiser tracking in that sense, because tracking your activity on that particular web page, it's not kind of recording your coming and going like cookies or the Facebook like button is, but it's mainly used by site owners then to improve their website, enhance their design. But it's still a way that websites use the information gathered when you connect to their site to keep track of you.
I want to be 100% clear on one thing. I mean, when you say you go to a website and there's a Twitter button or a like button for Facebook, even though you're not on Twitter, you're not on Facebook, but you're logged into those services, what you're saying is even if I don't click the like button, because obviously if I click the like button, I'm saying, hey, website, it's me, Ken, I like this. I want to tell everybody I like this. I'm complicit at that point. I was here. I like this. I'm letting the whole world know. What you're telling me is just being logged into one of those and then going to a website, which is almost all of them, that has a Facebook like button. Even if I don't participate there, I've just gone to the website, but I was also logged into Facebook. That's participation enough that now there's a pin in the map that I was there at that site, probably even at a certain time.
Exactly. You don't have to click the button to be affected. The button is tied into Facebook servers, and then you have cookies and the way Facebook's tracking. So yeah, Facebook knows that you were on whatever site, even if you're not sharing that news story.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, good. Let's go on to item 4 on the checklist. IP address and referral links.
So there are some more mundane ways of tracking users as well. These basic tracking methods are more like foundational components of analytics rather than being bona fide tracking on their own. Nonetheless, it's important to know about the information you're putting out there. So we're all aware that we expose our IP address to web servers whenever we visit a site. Pages track repeat visits, knowing that it's you specifically returning based on your IP address. Products to obscure your actual IP, like VPNs and proxies, they're gaining popularity right now for this very reason. Advertisers may track your IP as well, though it could be less reliable than simply using a cookie. Sites can track whether you click a link too. You might click a link that leads from one news website to another, for example. What happens when you arrive at the new website? Well, they'll record not only your arrival and perhaps your IP address, browser fingerprint, and so on, but also the server from which you came from. Referral tracking can be used to build up a profile of your browsing habits that advertisers like to use. It also lets the webmasters know where their visitors are coming from, which could be really helpful for development. Overall, though, these tracking methods operate at a very low level and are of lesser importance.
Except, again, I mean, forgive me if I missed something in there. There's got to be more value, though, in knowing that you are knowingly doing something. Like, okay, I go to abcnews.com, and I didn't even mean the network. I go to xyznews.com, and there's a Facebook button, but I don't hit the Facebook button. They know that I was there, but I didn't show a particular interest in any particular thing. If, on the other hand, I go to a website and click a link, I would think that tracking me then is actually, well, you say it's of lesser importance. It might seem like it's more valuable, because doesn't that mean that I'm kind of more open to whatever it is they want to throw my way?
Well, you're more. It's more valuable in the sense of maybe narrowing down your likes, dislikes, preferences, but even your act of not, clicking through or anything like that. We're talking massive amounts of data on millions and millions and millions of users, and so they're looking at kind of trends overall. So even if you're not doing something, I mean, that information can be taken into account, and the way that the data is analyzed, they cover all sorts of different data points, and kind of depending on what information they're looking to get out of it, they can kind of use the data in a bunch of different ways. It honestly, like when we're laying it out like this, even for me, and I've been on the web for a long time, it kind of makes you go, oh, seriously? Sometimes it seems almost a futile attempt to try and avoid the tracking, because it's just so, it's so ingrained in the way the web works.
Right. I'm trying to think of like a good, I don't know why, but I always sort of think in terms of analogy. I mean, I guess what I want to check first of all, well, I mean, here's kind of what I'm thinking. So I kind of feel like a sardine. Like I feel like a little fish in a school of fish in an ocean, and nobody is trying to catch me specifically. I'm not like the giant marlin out there. But the thing is, they scoop a net and I'm still in it. And so it's not like anybody is targeting me. It's just like anybody is targeting everybody in a way, which I guess I should have asked in the very beginning. My whole thing about Big Brother watching you, I mean, you can actually hone down to that kind of, and I'm using Big Brother as just, again, just another analogy. You can hone down to one specific user in all of this. But again, sort of like we talked about with the malware weeks ago, I mean, we're really, as you say, we're talking about numbers. We're talking about trends. We're talking about data. And yes, we can get to you specifically, but 99 times out of 100 or 999 times out of 1,000 or even bigger numbers than that, it's not you anybody's watching. It's everybody that somebody's watching.
Exactly. It's all, it's all about money when it comes down to it. We pay for internet access, but we don't pay for the majority of the content we consume online. Yes, some news sites have paywalls. Many of them do not. You don't pay for Facebook. You don't pay for Twitter. You're paying because you're the product. You're being advertised to. The advertisers are the real customers there in that sense. And it's kind of the way the web works. Again, yeah, it's not necessarily you in particular they really care about. They're caring more about did this ad do well? How are we going to tweak this to get more sales overall out of all the users? And it's kind of, the technology can be used for good or for bad or for somewhere in between. And it's pretty much like a lot of the topics we cover here on the show. It kind of depends on the situation.
I've got a few more questions to ask you, but let's go ahead and hit item number 5 on the checklist. Clickstream tracking.
All right. Well, when you're on a website, probably don't stop and think that the various links you're clicking or the text you're highlighting is all that important to anybody but you. But a lot of websites track that information as well. The technical term is clickstream tracking, and it's generally used to optimize the website or the content of the website based on how users are using the website. It has other purposes as well. For example, a site that has news content or stories of some sort, they might want to track what portions of text in an article a lot of users are highlighting to share with other people. Because that kind of data collected, again, in massive quantities, large volumes, many millions of users, could ultimately affect the type of content that the site's going to publish. If they know, one type of news story is getting a lot more attention than another, they'll gravitate towards that because more views from more users equals more ads being shown equals more money, yada, yada, yada. Again, when you're clicking on something, it's tailoring the type of ad content that might be displayed to you based on what those algorithms and that data thinks you'll be most likely to click or be interested in or buy. Ultimately, clickstream tracking is not as identifiable as a browser fingerprint or a cookie or anything else, but confined to a single site, it does help the site operator streamline their site and is, in a sense, a way of tracking.
So I guess the question I have then, and I think I've sort of been dancing around this all episode, we have an idea of why it's being done. It's being done to target ads for the most part. Is there a simple reason why we should care?
It depends. I know I keep saying that, but it really depends. There are some people who don't care at all. Mm-hmm. There are some people who care immensely and don't want any sort of tracking.
Okay.
And there are some people who maybe care a little bit because they're worried what that data could be used for if it falls into the wrong hands, for lack of a better way to phrase it. It's innocuous for the most part right now, aside from maybe those annoying ads following you around online. But all that data, I mean, it's being used for ads right now. But is that always going to be the case? Google is in the ad business, so that is obviously their cash cow, and they're going to stick with it.
Right.
But at the same time, the data could be put to a lot of different uses. So it's something to think about. I guess is the way it comes down to it.
Am I right in thinking, sort of like in the intro, I said nobody's watching you specifically, but that doesn't mean we're all leaving. I mean, if we're not taking certain precautions, and maybe some fairly extensive precautions, while nobody's trying to paint a picture of us right now online necessarily, we're all leaving enough information that someone could easily paint a picture of me specifically. I was going to say you specifically, but probably not you specifically, but me specifically, my mom specifically, my friends specifically. Even if nobody's trying to find out, where's Ken going today? Somebody, heck, depending on how long sites keep their information, somebody somewhere down the road could say, okay, where did Ken go on December 31st, 2016?
Yeah, I mean, depending on a lot of things, your ISP always has that information as well. People don't think about that one sometimes. Yeah, again, things to think about. It really is, it's up to each person individually to determine how much they value their privacy and how much they would care about browser tracking. But it's definitely something that we feel that users should at least be aware of so they can make an educated decision when it comes to it. And
you mentioned being logged into sites and tracking along that aspect of it. Well, let's say you're not logged into your favorite search engine account. So it's not logging it to your account, right? Well, what about when you log back in? Then do those cookies that are still on your computer from when you weren't logged in, do those all get submitted? So now all that data that you were gathering over time gets submitted to whatever site that you're going to and then ties it to your official account?
Is the answer to that yes?
Some would say yes. It depends on what search engine you're talking about there. And we talked about the battery life with fingerprinting, and it wasn't too long ago this year that one of the car taxi-like apps, basically they were accused of price surging for when the battery was at a low level, so you couldn't like compare different ride-hailing services. Now they came out and said that they don't use it for anything specifically like that, but it definitely raises concerns about what could be done with the information.
My privacy next to my lack of effort most dear. Is there like a simple way to take care of all of this stuff? I mean, it's a lazy question. I'm totally asking a lazy question, but the problem I'm having is when I hear all of these things, I try to begin to think, okay, so what are all of the steps that I would need to do just to go online and feel secure? Is there, I don't expect any one size fits all anything, but is there a simple way to stop a lot of this? Or is it just every time you get offline, be sure to clear your cookies? Is it a series of things that you have to do every time you go online before you go online? Is there a good way or a good system to sort of stop all this from happening?
There are a few different ways, and I guess it would kind of depend on how much effort you want to put into it. Yes, you could, after you're done browsing, you can actually set a lot of modern browsers to automatically clear data when you quit the browser. But that clears everything. So, you're losing all your browsing history along with all the cookies. And some cookies aren't bad cookies. There are specific programs that can target tracking cookies or flash tracking cookies, of which one of ours, MaxScan, does that. There are other programs that are kind of more tailored to deleting all browser files securely. Our other program, PrivacyScan, does that. For stuff that's not our programs, there are a number of web browser extensions, including Ghostery, AdBlock Plus, Privacy Badger, which I don't believe we've covered here before, and I keep meaning to. Those are all things that users can set up on their computers that can help remove the data that's being used to track on future visits to sites. There's some stuff you can't control. You aside from a proxy or VPN, like we mentioned before, you can't control your IP address. Yes, you could turn off JavaScript to block some of the analytic stuff, but you're going to have a really bad time with most websites these days because most modern websites make extensive use of it. Again, all trade-offs depending on the time and effort you want to expend. We'll include some of our suggestions in the write-up for this episode as well, for sure.
And I do want to let people know where they can find the write-up for this episode and for past episodes as well. The website is securemac.com/checklist. That is securemac.com/checklist. What do we decide? This is episode 16, right?
Yep.
So there are 15 other episodes to check out, and then every episode that'll come after will be there. So I'll say the website one more time, securemac.com/checklist. If you'd like to get in touch with us, maybe you have a question that you would like to ask or a topic you'd like to suggest, we do have an email address. That email address is checklist@securemac.com. That address again, checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, remember this. You are listening to The Checklist by Secure Mac. And we will talk to you next week.